Good morning, dear students. Now we are going to talk about British novel and block number third. And in this, we would like to talk about George Eliot, a very well-known novelist. She was actually very famous by her pen name George Eliot, but her original name was Mary Ann Evans, and she was a very famous English novelist, journalist, translator, and one of the leading writers of the Victorian era. She is the author of 7 novels, including Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Last Marner, Middlemarch, and Daniel Deronda. Most of them set in provincial England and known for their realism and psychological insight. So, as you are aware, actually, he is very famous for her novels, and because of that, she has created a very famous name for her. She used a male pen name to ensure her books would be taken seriously because you see female writers were not taken seriously those days. So because of that actually she tried to take a male pen name for her writing career. Female authors were published under their own names during Eliot's life, but she wanted to escape the stereotype of women only writing light-hearted romances. She also wished to have her fiction judged separately from her already extensive and widely known work as an editor and critic. An additional factor in her use of a pen name may have been a desire to shield her private life from public scrutiny. So that may be also one of the reasons why she decided to take a different name for her writing career. Her 1872 work Middlemarch has been described by Martin Amis and Julian Barnes as the greatest novel in English language. So Middlemarch, that is fortunately in our syllabus, is considered one of the important works. Throughout her career, Eliot wrote with a politically astute pen. From Adam Bede to The Mill on the Floss and Last Marner, Eliot presented the cases of social outsiders and small town persecution. Felix Holt and Radical and the Legend of Joel were overtly political, and political crisis is at the heart of Middlemarch, in which she presents the stories of a number of denizens of a small English town on the eve of the Reform Bill of 1832. The novel is notable for its deep psychological insight and sophisticated character portraits. So as we were talking about the novel, actually it is very clearly known for the deep psychological insights and sophisticated character portraits also. It has a different kind of, you see, atmosphere and different psychological insights. Readers in the Victorian era particularly praised her books for their depictions of rural society, for which she drew on her own early experiences, and she shared with Wordsworth the belief that there was much interest and importance in the mundane details of ordinary country lives. Eliot did not, however, confine herself her bucolic roots. Romola, a historical novel set in late 15th century Florence and touching on the lives of several real persons, such as the priest Gerolamo, displays her wider reading and interests. In The Spanish Gypsy, Eliot made a foray into verse, creating a work whose initial popularity has not endured. So, uh, actually, she has been talking in a different way, and that has been attracting the audience and the readers widely. The religious elements in her fiction also owe much to her upbringing. So that the particular kind of religious elements that are very much narrated there in her novels actually are because of her upbringing, because of her growth and development in the society in which she was. When Silas Marner is persuaded that his alienation from the church means also his alienation from society, the author's life is again mirrored with her refusal to attend church. She was at her most autobiographical in looking. So, as we were talking in the introductory part, also, my dear friends, she actually offers autobiographical elements in her writings. By the time of Daniel Deronda, Eliot's sails were falling off, and she faded from public view to some degree. But in the 20th century, she was championed by a new breed of critics, most notably by Virginia Woolf, who called Middlemarch one of the few English novels written for grown up people. So, Virginia Woolf, a very famous and notable writer also appreciated Middlemarch. And 20th century literary critics Harold Bloom placed Eliot among the greatest Western writers of all time. So this was her popularity actually. There was some time when her popularity went down, but once again in 20th century it came up, and people, particularly critics, started appreciating her work. And the nobles, here we talk about the nobles actually that we have mentioned earlier also. But you can remember some of these nobles actually, and because they were the important works by George Eliot, Adam Bede, that was written in 1859, The Mill on the Floss, written in 1860, Slas Marner, it was written in 1861, Ramola, 1863, Felix Holt, The Radical, it was written in 1866, Middlemarch, it was written in 1871-72, Daniel Deronda, 1876. Some of the very famous nobles. Here we go for Middlemarch, my dear friends. So, as we were talking at the first slide where we introduced George Eliot, that Middlemarch is one of the most appreciated novels written by George Eliot actually. And it's a kind of a study of provincial life. It's a novel by George Eliot, the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, later Marian Evans. So, because she was writing by her pen name, and it is her seventh novel that began in 1869 and then put aside during the final illness of Thornton Lewis, the son of her companion George Henry Lewis. During the following year, Eliot resumed the work, fusing together several stories into a coherent whole, and during 1871-72, the novel appeared in serial form. The first one-volume edition was published in 1874 and attracted large scale. So as we were talking, the first one-volume edition was published in 1874 and it attracted the larger people. The subtitle of Middlemarch is a study of provincial life. It is the subtitle of the novel Middlemarch. The novel is set in the fictitious Midlands town of Middlemarch. So, as R.K. Narayan also has got a fictitious place, Malgudi, in the same fashion, this noble Middlemarch also takes place in a fictitious place, that is Midlands. It has multiple plots with a large cast of characters, and in addition to its distinct, though interlocking narratives, it pursues number of underlying themes, including the status of women, the nature of marriage, idealism, self-interest, religion, hypocrisy, political reform, and education. The pace is leisurely, the tone is mildly didactic, with an authorial voice that occasionally bursts through the narrative, and the canvas is very broad. Middlemarch has retained its popularity and status as one of the masterpieces of English fiction. As we were talking, even in fact Virginia Woolf also appreciated and accepted that Middlemarch was one of the important and one of the very celebrated writings of English fiction. In separate centuries, Florence Nightingale and Kate Millett both remarked on the eventual subordination of Dorothea's own dreams to those of her admirer, Ladislaw. However, in the epilogue, George Eliot herself acknowledges the regrettable best of Dorothea's potential, blaming social conditions. Virginia Woolf gave the book unstinting praise, describing Middlemarch as the magnificent book that, with all its imperfections, is one of the few English novels written for grown-up people. So, as we were talking, my dear friends, even Virginia Woolf appreciated and she called it that it was one of the very important novels that are written for grown-up people. Martin Amis, Julian Barnes have cited it as probably the greatest novel in English language. So, put together, it was one of the important novels of English literature. And here we discuss for the important characters from the novel Middlemarch. And the first comes Dorothea Brooke, an intelligent and wealthy young woman who aspires to do great work. She can seldom get anyone to take her ideas seriously, and she decides to marry the Reverend Edward. Many decades her senior, to help him with the writing of his great research project. The key to all mythologies, the marriage is quickly revealed to be a mistake, as Edward does not take her seriously and resents her youth, enthusiasm, and energy. When her husband shuns her aside during their honeymoon, she finds a kinder spirit in the Reverend's first cousin, once removed, Bill Ladisla, and the two become friends. After Edward's death, when their mutual attraction might blossom, it is almost renounced because of various complications, including the provision in Edward's will that if Dorothea were to marry Ladislaw, she would be disinherited. Tertius Lydgate, an idealistic, proud, passionate, and talented, but naive young doctor of good birth, but a small financial means. He hopes to make great advancements in medicine through his research and the charity hospital in Middlemarch. He ends up entangled with Rosamund Bincy and they marry unhappily. Reverend Edward Casaubon, a pedantic, selfish clergyman of late middle age who is obsessed with finishing in scholarly research to the exclusion of other people and things. He marries Dorothea Brooke, leading to a loveless marriage. Mary Garth, the practical, plain, and kind daughter of Salve and Susan Garth, she works as Mr. Featherstone's nurse. She and Fred Bincy were childhood sweethearts, but she refuses to allow him to woo her until she shows himself willing and able to live seriously and sincerely. Arthur Brooke, the often befuddled and none too clever uncle of Dorothea and Celia Brooke. He has a reputation as the worst landlord in the country, but tries to stand for Parliament on a reform platform. Celia Brooke, Dorothea's younger sister, is also a great beauty, but attractive in a far more sensual way. She does not share Dorothea's idealism and asceticism, and is only too happy to marry the rejected Sir James Chatham. Sir James Chatham, a neighboring landowner. Sir James is in love with Dorothea and tries to ingratiate himself to her by helping her with her plans to improve conditions for the tenants. When she marries Edwards, he marries Celia Brooke instead. Rosamund Bincy. Being beautiful and shallow, Rosamund has a high opinion of her own charms and a low opinion of Middlemarch society. She marries Tertius Lydgate because she believes that he will raise her social standing and keep her comfortable and carefree. Fred Bincy, Rosamund's brother, he has loved Mary Garth since they were children. His family is hoping that he will find the secure life and advance his class standing by becoming a clergyman. But he knows that Mary will not marry him if he does so. Ladislaw, a young cousin of Mr. Edward, he has no property because his grandmother married a poor Polish musician and was disinherited. He is a man of great idealism and talent, but of no fixed profession. He comes to love Dorothea, but cannot marry her without her losing Mr. Edward's property. Mr. Humphrey and Mrs. Eleanor, neighbors of Brooks. Mr. Cadwallader is a rector. Mrs. Cadwallader is a pragmatic and talkative woman who comments on local affairs. With wry cynicism, she disapproves of Dorothea's marriage and Mr. Brooks' parliamentary endeavors. Middlemarch, Mr. Balter Bincy and Mrs. Lucy Bincy, respectable manufacturing family. They wish their children to advance socially and are disappointed by both Rosamund's and Fred's marriages. Mr. Salib Garth, Mary's Garth's father. He is a kind, honest, and generous businessman who is a surveyor and land agent involved in farm management. Mr. Camden, a poor but clever vicar and amateur naturalist, he is a friend of Lydgate and Fred Bincy and loves Mary Garth. Nicholas, wealthy banker, married to Mr. Bincy's sister Harriet, is a pious Methodist who tries to impose his beliefs in Middlemarch society. However, he also has a sordid past which he is desperate to hide. Mr. Peter Featherstone, old landlord of Stone Court, a self made man who married Caleb Garth's sister and later took Mrs. Bincy's sister as his second wife when his first wife died. Mrs. Jane Ball, a widow and Peter Featherstone's sister, has a son John. Mr. Hawley, foul mouthed businessman and enemy of Bulstrode. Mr. Malmsey is a grocer. Dr. Sparrow, Middlemarch doctor. Mr. Tyke, clergyman favored by Bulstrode. Rig Featherstone's illegitimate son, who appears at the reading of Featherstone's bill and is given his fortune instead of Fred. He is also related to John Raffles, who comes into town to visit Rig but instead reveals Bulstrode's past. Raffles is a braggart and a bully, a humorous scoundrel in the tradition of Sir John Falstaff, and an alcoholic. So these were some important characters, my dear friends. There is a long chain of characters. So we can remember some important characters. And here we go for the plot. And it is the story actually. And we would like to understand some of the important events and how the story goes. So here we go for the plot, my dear friends. Dorothea Brooke is an idealistic and well-to-do young woman who seeks to help those around her. For example, improving the lot of the local poor. She is seemingly set for a comfortable and idle life as the wife of neighboring landowner Sir James Chatham. But to the dismay and bewilderment of her sister Celia, who later married Chatham, and her loquacious uncle Mr. Brooke, she marries instead Edward, a dry pedantic scholar some decades older than Dorothea, who she believes is engaged in writing a great work, the key to all mythologies. She wishes to find fulfillment by sharing her husband's intellectual life. But during an unhappy honeymoon in Rome, she experiences his coldness towards her ambitions. Slowly, she realizes that his great project is doomed to failure, and her feelings for him descend to pity. Because he was not interested in marriage and in her romantic feelings, she forms a warm friendship with a young cousin of Edward's, Bill Ladislaw, but her husband's antipathy towards him is clear, partly based on his belief that Ladislaw is trying to seduce Dorothea to gain access to Edward's fortune, and Ladislaw is forbidden to visit. In poor health, Edward attempts to extract from Dorothea a promise that, should he die, she will avoid doing what I should deprecate and apply yourself to do what I desire. Meaning either that she should shun Ladislaw, or as Dorothea believes, that she should complete the key to all mythologies in his place, forever freezing her youthful intelligence and energy into animating the dead head of his extinct ideas. Before Dorothea can give her reply, Edward dies. She then learns that he has added the extraordinary provision to his will that if she should marry Ladislaw, Dorothea will lose her inheritance from Edward. Meanwhile, Tertius Lydgate, an idealistic young doctor with advanced ideas about medical research and reform, has arrived in Middlemarch. His voluntary hospital work brings him into contact with town's financier, Mr. Bulstrode, who has philanthropic learnings. He is also a religious zealot with secret past. Bulstrode's niece is Rosamond Bincy, the mayor's daughter and the town's recognized beauty. And she sets her sights on Lydgate, attracted by what she believes to be his aristocratic connections and his nobility as a newcomer to the town. She wins him, but the disjunction between her self-centered narcissism and his idealistic notions of helping others ensures that their marriage is unhappy. Lydgate overspends in order to please Rosamond, and he is soon deeply in debt and has to seek help from Bulstrode. He is partly sustained emotionally in his marital and financial woes by his friendship with Fairbrother, a generous, spirited, and engaging parson from a local parish. At the same time, readers have become acquainted with Rosamond's university educated, restless, and irresponsible brother Fred, who is reluctantly destined for the church. He is in love with his childhood sweetheart, Mary Garth, a plain, sensible, and forthright young woman who will not accept him until he abandons the church, in which she knows he has no interest, and settles in a more suitable career. Mary's honesty contributes to Fred's losing a considerable fortune, which was bequeathed to him by the aged and irascible Mr. Featherstone, then resigned by a letter which Featherstone on his deathbed begs Mary to destroy. Mary refuses to engage in such an illegal act and begs Featherstone to wait until the morning when a legal bill superseding the other bill can be legally drawn up. But Featherstone dies before the morning. Fred, in debt after some injudicious horse dealing, is forced to take out a loan that is guaranteed by Mary's father, Caleb Garth, to meet his commitments. When Fred cannot pay the loan, Caleb Garth's finances become compromised. Since he must pay back the loan himself, this humiliation shocks Fred into reassessing his life, and he resolves to train as a land agent under the forgiving Caleb. These three interwoven narratives, with side plots such as the disastrous though comedic attempt by Mr. Brooke to enter Parliament as a sponsor of reform, are the basis of the novel until Bell into its final third. Then a new thread emerges with the appearance of John Raffles, who knows about Bulstrode's shady past and is determined to exploit this knowledge by blackmail. In his youth, the now fire and brimstone church-going Bulstrode engaged in some questionable financial dealings. He also owes the foundation of his fortune to a marriage to a much older wealthy widow. Bulstrode's terror of public exposure as a hypocrite leads him to hasten the death of the mortally sick Raffles by giving him access to forbidden alcohol and excessive amounts of opium. But he is too late. Raffles had already spread the word. Bulstrode's disgrace engulfs the luckless Lydgate as knowledge of the financier's loan to the doctor becomes public, and he is assumed to be complicit with Bulstrode. Only Dorothea and Fairbrother maintain faith in Lydgate, but Lydgate and Rosamond are encouraged by the general opprobrium to leave Middlemarch. The disgraced and reviled Bulstrode's only consolation is that his wife stands by him as he to face his exile. The final thread in the complex Babes concerns Ladislaw. The peculiar nature of Edward's will has meant that suspicion has fallen upon Dorothea and Ladislaw as possible lovers, creating an awkwardness between the two. But Edward's paranoia is well founded because Ladislaw is secretly in love with Dorothea, but he keeps that to himself, having no desire to involve her in scandal or to cause her disinheritance. He has remained in Middlemarch. He has remained in Middlemarch working as a newspaper editor for Mr. Brooke. He has also become a focus for Rosamond's treacherous attentions. After Brooke's election campaign collapses, there is nothing to keep Ladislaw in Middlemarch, so he visits Dorothea to make his farewell. But Dorothea, released from life with Edward but is still the prisoner of his will, has come to fall in love with Ladislaw. She had previously seen him as her husband's unfortunate relative, but the peculiar nature of Edward's will led her to begin to see him in a new light, as well as to open herself and Ladislaw up to public gossip. Renouncing Edward's fortune, she shocks her family again by announcing that she will marry Ladislaw. At the same time, Fred, who has proven an apt pupil of Caleb's profession, finally wins the approval and hand of Mary. Beyond the principal stories, we are given constant glimpses into other scenes. We observe Featherstone's Abrasius relative gathering for the spoils, visit Fairbrother's strange menace, and become aware of enormous social and economic divides. But these are backdrops for the main stories which, true to life, are left largely suspended, leaving a short finale to summarize the fortunes of our protagonists over the next 30 years or so. The book ends as it began, with Dorothea. Her full nature spent itself in channels which had no great name on the earth, but the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. Here we go for the significance and its reception. Virginia Woolf, as we have mentioned earlier, also described Middlemarch as one of the few English novels written for grown up people. In addition, B.S. Pritchett in the Living Novel wrote, "No Victorian novel approaches Middlemarch in its width of reference, its intellectual power of the spaciousness and of narrative. I doubt if any Victorian novelist had so much to teach the modern novelists as George Eliot. No writer has ever represented the ambiguities of moral choice so fully." Critic Jerome Beattie argues that one could read Middlemarch as George Eliot's reform novel, although political history is represented only indirectly. So, as we were talking, my dear friends, it is very well appreciated everywhere, and the critics from every nook and corner, including Virginia Woolf and B.S. Pritchett and other different critics, also appreciated the novel for its contents, for its philosophy, for its spaciousness, for its narrativeness, and for some other features also. And this is one of the reasons why Middlemarch is a very celebrated and one of the most important novels written by George Eliot. It is everywhere liked and read because of its content. It has been very popular since its first publication. The novel remains a favorite with readers today. In 2003, the novel was listed at number 27 by the British Broadcasting Corporation survey, The Big Red. In January 2007, a book entitled The Top 10, edited by Jan, listed Middlemarch as number 10 in its list, the top 10 greatest books of all time, based on the ballots of 125 selected writers. So, as we were talking, including all the surveys and the critics and the readers, they have all appreciated the novel for its contents and its beauty, and it is widely recognized and read for its charming characterization and the subject matter and the plot also. So this was all about Middlemarch. Hope you have got the idea. Thank you.